Last time, the world froze. People waited. Factories slowed. Investors hesitated. Families postponed their lives. No explosion, just stillness. But here is the deeper question. Why does an economy move at all? What makes a person sign the contract, open the factory, hire the worker, build the house? It is not certainty, because certainty does not exist. In the early 1930s, something became painfully clear. Interest rates were low, wages had fallen, assets were cheaper than ever. On paper, conditions were favorable, and yet no one moved. Why? Because investment is not a calculation about today, it is a bet on tomorrow, and tomorrow no longer made sense. This was the realization that unsettled everything. The economy was not a machine adjusting to inputs. It was a system animated by expectations. And expectations are fragile. You cannot touch them. You cannot legislate them. You cannot demand them into existence. They live in imagination. One man began to articulate this truth more clearly than anyone else. He saw that the traditional view of markets assumed too much stability, too much knowledge, too much foresight, too much calm. But real life is not calm. Real life is uncertain. Not mildly uncertain, radically uncertain. There are moments when no model can predict what comes next. Moments when the future is not risky, but unknowable. And in those moments, something else takes over. Impulse, instinct, confidence, or its absence. He called this force animal spirits, not to suggest that people are irrational beasts, but to acknowledge something uncomfortable. We act because we feel able to act. We invest because we believe, however vaguely, that things will improve. We hire because we sense opportunity. We borrow because we imagine growth. Remove that belief, and even the smartest person stands still. Think about a business owner during a downturn. The spreadsheets might show opportunity. Competitors are weak. Costs are lower. Assets are cheap. Yet he hesitates. Why? Because numbers do not erase fear. Because uncertainty about next year outweighs opportunity today. Because survival feels more urgent than expansion. That hesitation, repeated thousands of times across a nation, becomes recession. Not because resources vanished, but because imagination contracted. This is what classical economics struggled to see. It assumed that when conditions improved, behavior would follow. Lower rates, more borrowing. Lower wages, more hiring. But what if psychology blocks the mechanism? What if fear interrupts the transmission? Then the machine metaphor collapses. Because machines do not hesitate. People do. The Great Depression exposed this flaw brutally. Banks reopened, but deposits did not return immediately. Factories had capacity, but orders were missing. Investors had capital, but no conviction. Everyone waited for someone else to move first. And this waiting was logical. No one wanted to be the first to take a risk in a collapsing world. But if everyone waits for certainty, certainty never arrives. Here lies the paradox. The economy depends on action. Action depends on belief. Belief depends on the future feeling possible. When the future feels dark, action collapses, even if opportunities exist. So the crisis was not only financial, it was existential. This insight did not make him popular. Because it challenged the comforting idea that markets always self-correct smoothly, it suggested that there are times when fear becomes self-sustaining, when pessimism feeds on itself, when negative expectations create the very outcomes they fear. Imagine workers expecting layoffs. They cut spending. Businesses see lower demand. They lay off workers. Expectation becomes reality. Not because of conspiracy, because of feedback. This feedback loop can work in reverse. When optimism spreads, investment rises. When investment rises, employment grows. When employment grows, confidence strengthens, and optimism justifies itself. Booms are fueled by the same force as crashes: animal spirits. But this creates a troubling implication. If prosperity depends partly on collective mood, then stability cannot rely on logic alone. You cannot simply announce that the economy is healthy and expect people to believe it. You cannot lecture fear away. Confidence must be experienced, seen, felt. Consider modern examples. A startup founder raises funding not because success is guaranteed, but because investors believe in a narrative. A homeowner buys property not because prices are certain to rise, but because the future feels stable. A consumer spends not because income is mathematically secure, but because tomorrow feels manageable. We act on stories, and stories shift faster than statistics. This is what made uncertainty so dangerous in the 1930s. People were not calculating small risks. They were confronting the possibility that the system itself might not hold. Under those conditions, caution becomes dominant. Saving replaces spending. Preservation replaces expansion. And the economy contracts, not from lack of resources, but from lack of courage. So what could restore movement? If expectations drive action, how do you rebuild expectations? Waiting had failed. Time alone did not heal fear. The invisible hand seemed hesitant. The answer that began to form was radical. If private confidence collapses, something must step forward visibly, something large enough to interrupt paralysis, not to replace private action forever, but to restart it. Because once movement begins, expectations can shift again.
A factory reopening changes perception. A public project hiring thousands changes mood. A visible sign of activity breaks the loop of waiting. It signals the future is not empty. And once belief returns, private actors follow. Investment resumes. Hiring expands. Confidence rebuilds itself. But this raises a profound question. If action can create confidence, does that mean confidence can be manufactured? Is belief something authorities can engineer? Or is it always fragile, always temporary? The concept of animal spirits does not romanticize irrationality. It acknowledges that under deep uncertainty, logic has limits. When the future is fundamentally unknowable, people fall back on instinct, on mood, on collective emotion. This does not make them foolish, it makes them human. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Markets are not purely systems of supply and demand. They are systems of expectation. They expand when hope expands. They contract when fear dominates. And sometimes, fear becomes rational. In those moments, waiting is safe individually, but destructive collectively. The Great Depression forced a new understanding. Recovery was not only about fixing prices, it was about restoring imagination. Not fantasy, but the simple belief that tomorrow could be navigated. Without that belief, even cheap money remains idle. Even opportunity looks like danger. So we return to the question that began this episode. What makes people act? Not certainty, not guarantees, but a fragile conviction that the future is worth engaging. When that conviction disappears, economies freeze. When it returns, they move. The challenge is not eliminating uncertainty. That is impossible. The challenge is preventing uncertainty from turning into paralysis. In the next episode, we explore the moral and political implications of this idea. If expectations shape reality, who bears responsibility when they collapse? Should governments intervene to stabilize confidence? Or does intervention create new distortions? For now, we remain with the central insight. Human beings do not act because the future is known. They act because they believe it is possible. And when belief fades, even the strongest system can stand still.